All right, everybody, welcome back. This is SIC Talks number 89. I'm here with Michael Miraflor, who I have known for probably as long as anybody I've had on the podcast. I met Michael probably in 2005, 2006, I would bet, when he was over at what was then Zenith or maybe even Optimedia, um,
No, I was at Deep
working
Focus, I
on.
think. I was at Deep Focus.
Were you over the Deep Focus? Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. And then,
Yeah.
but in any case, pioneering. Role in digital media buying at the time, digital media planning, digital media buying, and of course, I was there trying to flog Vice's wares. Over the course of the years, Michael has then gone on to move through a bunch of different roles in the media and in the sort of tech adjacent world. He is was very active on Clubhouse, and in fact, we had a show on Clubhouse for a while together, and then beyond that has more recently moved into the tech space. He was at Hannah Gray, a venture capitalist firm focused on tech, and is now operating Third City, which is a consultancy of his own, as well as a newsletter by the same name, which is really excellent. Michael, I have to say, like, you came out of the box strong with that newsletter.
Yeah. I've since lapsed, so it's been quite a few weeks. Um, but I am in the midst of getting out, I think, edition 5. So I'm up to 1,000 subscribers with 4 posts. So I think that's good trajectory, and I plan to keep
It's
it going.
It's great. It's great. And then Michael additionally is one of the co-hosts of Breakfast Club, the East Side edition, along with our buddies Isaac Bess and Sam Valenti. And so, I really appreciate you, Michael, picking up the franchise and taking it with you, as you move through those Los Angeles streets.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of fun, and as you know, it's very difficult to meet like-minded people in Los Angeles. It's part of the reason why there are multiple LA breakfast clubs, but every single person who I've met that I didn't have the pleasure of knowing prior has, most people have reached back out and are aggressively asking when the next one is because they get so much value out of just like being around other people with the same energy.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. So I think that actually is one of the things that I like about you and your output, if we want to think of your output as a manifestation of your energy, which is that it is wide ranging and capacious and sort of always on, right? And I see that a lot through, like, you're very good at Twitter, for instance, which I am very not good at, have never been good at, and it feels like you do that as a means to say, I have experience and point of view that I want to share with people in a very magnanimous way, not in a
Mm.
self-aggrandizing way or in an agenda-driving way. And so anyway, I wonder if I'm just reading, you know,
No, I
into
appreciate that.
that.
I've been on Twitter since I think 2007 or 2008, the
Right.
very beginning.
Yeah, very, very early.
And yeah, I don't really have a strategy. Some people ask me like, "Hey, have you written down your strategy? Is it something that you are willing to maybe commercialize and sell? Because it seems to be pretty effective." And to be honest, it's
Oh,
just an
wow.
extension of my brain. Like whenever I have a thought, I don't consider myself especially generous with thoughts and ideas, but I don't see how they can be of any sort of value to anyone, including myself, unless I get it out there. And Twitter is like a direct feed to people who choose to receive those thoughts in POV.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
sure.
and I've accumulated I've grown a pretty great audience over the past decade or so. So I'm
Yeah.
at about 25,000 followers. So, I mean, it's interesting to see what catches fire. It's interesting to see what gets traction. It's interesting to see what kinds of people come out of the woodwork to comment on specific
Hmm.
topics, and a lot of times, it's a good leading or lagging indicator of what the general zeitgeist or what the discourse of the moment is. So, I mean,
Right.
if it's valuable to everyone else, to me, it's just to document my thoughts over time. So I consider myself a power user, advanced Twitter search. So a lot of times when I'm doing a project or I just want to backtrack to see how my thoughts on a certain topic or a brand has evolved over the years, over the, I don't know, a couple of decades now, it becomes really interesting and exploratory thing.
Yeah, I would imagine that to be the case, and to hear you explain it that way, I sort of regret not having the tool at my fingertips. I have instead a series of moleskin notebooks that I have to go back through and page through in an analog fashion.
Oh my
It's
God.
a
Well,
little,
I'm
it's
trying to get
fun, but it's a little painful.
I'm trying to diversify and be a bit more analog. And also, you have incredible newsletters. And you actually own that data. Like you know who follows you and you can reach out to every individual person. Part of the
Yeah, that's
reason why
true.
I started the Third City newsletter was because one, Twitter, which I will always call Twitter, isn't
Of
what it
course.
used to be. And I realized that I don't own any of that data. Like I can export a body of my tweets, but if I wanted to get in touch with the groups of people or individuals that follow me, it's really difficult. So try to
Yeah.
slowly but surely port that over somewhere else. And Substack to me is the lowest hanging fruit, lowest barrier to transfer. But I do have this fear that Twitter will just continue to degrade and eventually collapse. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's. I think this is the worry with all of those platforms that 20 years in you start to you begin to see the obsolescence or the trajectory to potential obsolescence in a very real fashion. Well, listen, speaking of Substack and the newsletter, those who listen to the pod know that this is ostensibly a way to track some of the stories of the week that are featured in SIC, my Thursday newsletter, and to get a smart person's perspective on it. And so I sent Michael a work in progress list for the newsletter, which comes out today, and he I like identified a few things that jumped out at you. Michael, one of the things that I think is interesting about your perspective on this is that because you have been on the like the buy side, the literal like coal face of digital monetization, you have been at the on the strategy side, sort of thinking about what the future coal faces look like. You have been in on the investor side, thinking about what are the sorts of picks and shovels and digital tools that we're going to need in the future to continue this sort of like universe. Um, I would venture to guess you've got some pretty strong opinions about some of the stories that came out this week. So I'm keen to know, like, where do you want to start? What jumped out at you first?
um, we can start out with the PSFK announcement of
Oh,
the relaunching of
interesting. Okay.
Trend God. I think that's really interesting. I think there is sort of this halfway existential debate amongst people who consider themselves futurists or trend forecasters by trade because there's so much of that kind of content, especially with short form
Yeah.
video and TikTok. That PSFK, who's been around for a couple of decades now, since the very beginnings of digital, released a product. I think it was a couple of years ago at this point, or last year, called Trend God. They've refined it since, and they recently relaunched it. I just think it's funny that it's called Trend God. To be honest,
All right.
when it first was launched, when Piers tweeted it, I thought it was a parody or a joke or a
Right.
commentary on AI, but it was a real tool that was being built. And then so many months later or a year later, I've noticed this thing where I don't know what it is. I don't know if this is like a meta trend in design or brand or corporate naming, but Trend God I would put in the same bucket as like Hugging Face, App Lovin'. There's an AI company called Happy Robot that just landed a $16 million seed round with Andreessen Horowitz. So I don't think it's
Okay.
intentional that these names are kind of clumsy and kitschy. But I think there was a point in time in like the ZERP era 2010s where people really overthought the meaning behind names.
Sure.
Whereas
Sure.
now it's just, it's a matter of, internal consensus. And sure, it could be silly or it could be irreverent. And it doesn't have to seem like you're naming a child. And maybe you don't have to think about it affecting your bottom line or quarterly earnings reports. It's just a name is just a name. If it's catchy, it's
Right.
catchy. So I don't know if that's the
Well,
strategy behind Trend God, but I think the product is really interesting because it kind of compresses, this process that has been refined over time where giant companies like WGSN and, freelance strategists that operate as futurists, they've kind of created this craft of futurism and trend forecasting, which I think is valuable. And now you have this tool, and I think this is sort of like an indicator or harbinger of everything else that's happening with AI. you can do a lot of
Right.
that work and compress it into like some query inputs and get out like pretty good results, like getting you 70% of the way there versus if you hired someone to do the work over the course of a couple of
Right.
weeks.
Well, it's interesting. So Trend God, right, as you said, is a product of PSFK, which is our mutual acquaintance and friend Piers Fox, who has been doing this for a long time, and he sort of relaunched. I think his fundamental question is like, what is the role of a trend forecasting or trend analysis firm in the current marketplace when there is so much information that it's hard to parse through. B, there are so many people who claim to have an expert opinion. And C, um, there is just so much slop that to a certain point, there has to be a regression back to literally just like gut decision making or, reading the vibe lines as much as the trend lines. Um, but what Piers has done is sort of repackaged
Mm-hmm.
this suite of stuff, and you can go in and you can put in. I'm happen to be wearing a sweater from Ralph Lauren. You put in Ralph Lauren and go, okay, trend God, what are the trends that Ralph Lauren should be paying attention to, or what will the trends will be important? And trend God will tell you some stuff. And to your point, like some of it will be specious, some of it will be potentially silly, but a lot of it will be really like spot on and well researched, the sort of thing that you would get from a firm. So yeah,
Yeah.
it is remarkable. It's also remarkable that that tool is free because what it's essentially doing is giving you access to some version of Piers's brain and then hooking you on his brain so that you go back and buy more.
Yeah. If I could take the algo of Trend God and that code and apply it to my Twitter persona, for example, I would do it in a heartbeat. And I know that there are several tools out there that claim to do something similar, but I've tweeted so much
Mhm.
that it would just be so expensive because they've made the API calls really overwhelming. But yeah, I think from a business development perspective, from like an access perspective, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And if I take my strategist hat off and I put my investor hat on, this idea of vertical AI, of training a local LLM to to parse and study and categorize a body of work that is held within the walls of a company is really hot right now. It's really interesting, and it's more difficult than you would think it is for technical reasons.
Yeah.
But if you can imagine a Fortune 1000 company with 100 years of history, both corporate history and brand history and everything in between, much of that is stuck in physical file cabinets or on data servers that have no
Right.
easy way to access or parse or categorize. So you inject some AI and you put an easy to use front end, and you're able to, to leverage that data with the power of whatever, with Llama, with OpenAI, with
Right.
any of the big AI players and what they can do with that data. And it becomes really, really interesting really quickly. And you can transform the way that your business operates, at least from an information flow perspective. So it's exciting, but at the same time, it's the same with every AI enterprise application. Like I can't help but think like this is an immediate attempt at the disintermediation of like, you know, entry level, maybe mid level white collar work. Like it's
Hmm.
not
Sure.
necessarily designed with the intention of eliminating jobs, but it makes a lot of that busy work so easy. But if the busy work
Yeah.
is what makes you a good, thoughtful worker, executive, creative, like where does it all go? And I didn't mean to
Right.
drop that bomb and be like super existential, but like that's where my mind goes when I see a tool like this that is so good and it's so effective, and I kind of
Right.
understand, if not the intent, like what it's capable of doing. It's like it's scary and it's
Well,
exciting at the same time.
okay, so the flip side to that though is if you think about another, by happenstance, and because Piers has been on this show, and another person that you probably know, Noah Breyer,
Yeah.
from Brand. Noah posted something this week about how a mutual friend of his, or a friend of his in a group chat named Ricky, who I think might be our buddy Ricky Engelberg. I think it
Hmm.
probably is, another former guest on the show.
Hmm.
Um, his one of his kids was given a word search that's in the shape of a like a glyph, like a smiley face. In other words, it's a
Yeah.
circular graph that has a space, like empty space for the eyes and for the smile. And Ricky's question was, I wanted to try to get AI to solve this word search to see how you do it. And Noah writes probably 3,000 words about how essentially impossible it is for AI to solve this problem that a 7-year-old is tasked with on a daily basis at school. And I just think like it is, on the one hand, your existential concerns are totally well placed, and on the other hand, it's a little bit of a red herring when it comes down to where the rubber actually
Hmm.
meets the road in some respects. And so I think to your point, the future is very uncertain, but I tend to be bullish on humans, the continued viability of humans in that space.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm naive,
I
but
consider myself like a rational optimist if that exists. Um,
yeah, has to.
but I think it's this sort of like dialogue and if you want to call it discourse that is important to keep on having, because no one knows what the future is. But some of these models are, yeah, they're really great at doing the robot stuff, but they continue to hallucinate with some tasks that seem to be simple, especially from like a cognitive perspective, like from a reasoning perspective. But even that's getting a lot better. I think my big fear is that there are as many humans who are very thoughtful about pushing the potential of these tools as there are people that just see this as a shortcut.
Yeah.
And you see it. I mean, I see it on Twitter every day, and I actively push back against it. And people call me a curmudgeon or a luddite or whatever, but I'm not. I'm the opposite of that. I just, you know, and I know that, I've heard you speak about this and write about it, but like, there will be more work. If we want to talk about trends work, for example, there will be more trend forecasting work that sits in the middle, and there's
Yeah.
so there's going to be more mediocrity, if you want to call it that, or more
Hmm.
average work, and then the truly good work will be kind of pushed up to like the upper percentiles, which is fine, and it's always been that way, but it's
The
going to
right, or to the lower percentiles where it becomes effectively invisible to people, except
yes,
those who really know how to look for it specifically.
or who are willing to pay an exorbitant amount for something that is essentially craft.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, to me, that's the high end, and then the low end is the sort of vanishing point of availability where we move into a truly, if you know, you know, kind of
right, right.
paradigm.
I'm thinking of it from like a longitudinal perspective, from like the business of. So
Hmm.
PSFK, it
Hmm.
makes perfect sense for them to do this because people who are in the know what PSFK is capable of, and this is additive to their services. But if you're like a very smart 22-year-old that has aspirations of being a solid trend forecaster, and you know how to do it from a craft perspective, you can't help but need to add AI to your tool belt from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it's
For
an
sure.
uphill battle to categorize yourself as that, that upper percentile, right? Because you're kind of you're coming from behind in a way. I don't know if I'm
So what
articulating
you're
myself
so what you're
properly, but it's like
no. So what you're saying is that I mean, old guys like us will win. We continue to win. We've
I'm not
preserved our
saying that,
we've
but
preserved our place by historical accident. We've preserved our place in the hierarchy because yeah. Look, I think it is fascinating. I guess from my standpoint, like I'm the whole proliferation of this stuff reminds me of the value of and the need for edges and edge cased as the places to look for inspiration and to seek out for the sake of experience. And I think the people who do that, as long as they can sort of manage the middle as well, will be the winners.
yeah, edges and intersections. I agree with you. That's where the magic still happens and will always happen.
Edges and intersections, I like that a lot. So well, so that one jumped at you. You also sent a big list of other stories. Where else did your head go in the from the sick list this week?
I don't know. Let's spin the wheel. I'll let you choose, and we'll see where it goes.
All right, cool. Let's talk about the shopping method that isn't going away. This is a story in the Atlantic about how brands are returning or turning or continuing to rely upon catalogs. What was it there that grabbed you?
Well, just yesterday I received my annual edition of the Restoration Hardware catalog,
Okay,
and
which is
I have
like the size of a phone book, and
it's
right?
shrunken. It's shrunken quite a bit over time,
Oh,
but it's still,
interesting. Okay.
well, maybe not quite a bit. A bit. I'd say they shaved off a couple of pounds, but it's still pretty hefty. I think it's like 3.5, 4 pounds. I think it's still in my mailroom. I have a scale here. I was gonna weigh it and tweet it later, but it's nice enough that I can put it on my coffee table, and no one would blink. Um,
Would question it, yeah.
yeah, I think it's really interesting how we've come full circle, right? Like you've had so many brands abandon the idea of a print catalog for obvious reasons. Like it's expensive. There are a lot of logistics involved. Like you can accomplish the same information transmission via email, but there's so much of that now. There's so much digital information and slop and otherwise
Yeah.
out there that the easiest way, and maybe easiest is the wrong word, but an effective way of cutting through the clutter is to go back to, for some brands, their roots in publishing an annual or a quarterly or regular physical catalog that you get in your mail. And it's interesting to see digital native brands like Amazon, for example. I think they published their third or fourth edition of their like kids book, so that
Hmm.
children can. For all my friends that have kids, like they said, they throw their kids this catalog and they start circling and
Oh,
starring, and it becomes a very
interesting.
tactile, physical thing that they enjoy in a way that's different than how they enjoy their iPads, which I think is
Huh.
fascinating.
That
From a
is really fascinating. I mean, that
Mhm.
calls to probably to mind the behavior that we would have demonstrated as kids ourselves, but then also because my kids are older, right? They're
Mhm.
18 and 15. It would never have occurred to me that younger kids would interact with physical media in that fashion. Like my kids have moved past it. Or at least circling it. Like, they'll read stuff, they'll look
Yeah,
at stuff, but it's not like they're not circling things. It's not a coloring book exercise type thing. But that's
yeah.
fascinating. They
I think that analog arc is like it probably skipped your kids, so it like skipped a generation because we fully
Mhm.
digitized your children's generation. But now it's like I think some parents of young children are actively trying to balance screen time and analog time, and it's a struggle, obviously. But it's interesting to see the world of media kind of coming back, or the world of promotions come back to physicality. I also think
Yeah.
it's part of a larger conversation about like the return of print in general
Hmm.
and
For
quality
sure.
print. Like a lot of these catalogs, I know I pointed out Restoration Hardware, but a lot of these catalogs are beautifully shot, high production quality.
Yep.
Many of them are bound in such a way where you wouldn't mind keeping them for either archival purposes or it just looks beautiful, so you don't mind it lying around and having visitors see it. But there are a number of resurgent or net new print publications that,
Yep.
for the same reason that I think people appreciate, commercial catalogs, appreciate just being able to pick something up and read some good prose or good articles or great content. I have one right now, right next to me, Arena magazine, which I think is just really good. Um,
Is that arena as in the website RARE
no, no, no.
dot NA?
This magazine, I forgot the name of the publisher.
I
This is
remember the
edition
old.
one.
I mean, I remember the old arena was like a cousin of Maxim, or it was like a men's mag, wasn't it?
I don't recall that one. There might have been. This one is about American dynamism and trying to take the optimist lens towards
Oh wow, interesting.
technology. They're on their second edition. It's really solid, especially when I was in the VC space. It was kind of necessary reading because it represented what I think is the kind of default mode of operation when you're looking to invest in things that are considered American dynamism, especially when it comes to like defense tech and deep tech and aerospace and things like that. But it's an interesting, really interesting POV, but it's a beautifully done magazine. Another one that I don't know where I put it, but Mountain Gazette, which I think you might be
Oh yeah, yeah, sure.
familiar with. I love Mountain Gazette because it is an extremely large format and it's shot beautifully. And it's something that I know I'll keep forever. The thing about Arena and Mountain Gazette and a few other of these magazines um, is that the advertising in these magazines is bespoke. Again,
Right.
you want to talk about long arcs. Like, this is the kind of conversation about bespoke advertising, specific to not just these publications, but to when they're published, like time of year or geography in some cases, that you and I would be having when I was at Deep Focus and your advice like almost 20 years
Yep.
ago. It's like, we're going to be
Yep.
doing something that literally cannot be cut and paste into another publication, that will make sense only for this audience. And we are going to take time and effort to shoot it and stylize it and publish it in a way where it's going to work for this niche.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me and you as just like the way things should be, but this is kind of like counterculture in publishing right now.
hmm
And
hmm
I think it's
Well, but is it part of the pendulum swinging back in that way
Mhm.
where publishers, I mean, I think, and Mountain Gazette a good example of this, but it's like publishers begin to understand like the only way forward in a world of programmatic and depersonified messaging is to have a direct relationship with people, and in order to do that, you have to be able to speak their language, and so you create
Yes,
this shared ground.
tech bros for the past decade have, and I consider myself a halfway tech bro, so this is kind of like
Okay, yeah, yeah, tech bro adjacent.
an indictment of myself. We used to think that this could be accomplished with demographic information and like,
Yeah.
you know, like hyper specific information about your persona kind of mirrored back at you on ads. And we both know that's like, it's not as effective because it's obvious what is trying to be accomplished. And
Yeah.
there's no warmth to it. There's a lack of kind of humanity and craft in it. Whereas I'm happy that it's coming back, and I'm happy that it's coming back in print format. I expect it to come back in the digital space. I'm not sure in what form, but it
hmm
seems to be this underlying current. The other thing about this new wave of print publications is that they're very expensive.
Yeah.
Which I think is good, because it means that they're starting from a place where the people that are exposed to them are people who are willing to pay upwards of $40 per issue. So these publications don't have to depend upon and have advertising as their sole revenue source to survive. Because you want to talk about the Time Incs and the Hearsts and the Condé Nast of the world, like a disproportionate amount of their balance sheet is dependent on advertisers. Like, they
Right.
give their magazines away for free, or you'll get an offer every other day for like, a year of GQ for $10. So they're making no more. It's a loss leader for them, and they have to
Yeah.
make that up with
Yeah.
advertising. So I think some of these magazines, I think they are finally coming from a place, and I love this for publishing, a negotiation place of strength where they're probably saying no to a lot of advertisers. And for the ones they want to work with, they're saying, yeah, we'll take you, but let's do this the right way. And it'll be
Right.
beneficial for both sides. And I love that, just in general, for the health of the publishing and the advertising ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? It's like, speaking of Hearst, the former president of Hearst, Troy Young, who is a friend
Hmm.
and has the podcast People versus Algorithms. He talks a lot about, or he has talked a lot recently about the notion that small, healthy businesses like that are possible and are probably the future. I think Brian Morrissey, who's his podcast partner, takes the position that like this is the future of media. And Troy, on the one hand, agrees, and on the other hand, goes, "Yeah, but those aren't big businesses. Like, we're here to make." There's this impulse of like, well, we have to make big businesses, and I think a lot of what this is saying basically is, no, you actually don't have to make big businesses. You can make small businesses that work well, that are durable, and that are actually sort of fun and sustainable. And so
Yeah.
let's focus our attention there.
I can speak for another hour just on that topic, especially.
I would imagine, because the venture model. I mean, so here's the question. So when I was helping a friend try to raise money for a startup, I saw a very clear path based on some existing relationships that I had, and this market that was growing, to a 10x exit within 18 months, 2 years. And every VC that we talked to were just like, not interested. And I was just sort of like, wait, hold on. We can 10x money in 18 months, like, not guaranteed, of course, but like, this will work. And they're like,
Yeah.
no, it has to be 100x, or we don't even want to look at it. That's, I mean, it's crazy. And I'd imagine, having been in that space and also feeling the way you feel about, stuff like these print magazines, there must have been a really interesting tension there. How'd that work?
All right. If you don't mind down this rabbit hole, because
No, let's do it.
I'm
Yeah, of course.
allowed to speak freely now about my feelings about this industry. I still retain a romantic view of venture capital, right? Like, it is part of the engine of modern
It's
capitalism.
the fuel, right, of
Yeah,
capitalism, sure.
it's created the modern world, and yeah, it's created a lot of good. It's created a lot of questionable, maybe net negative things, but it has provided the fuel for a lot of what we consider to be essential in the modern world. It has created prosperity.
Yeah,
But, in the past 30 years, venture capital has become a bit of a system. And it's broken out of being a cottage industry to being something a lot larger, which is part of the reason why I found myself in that world for a few
sure.
years. Coming out of it, I have a lot of reflections on the way certain ideas were treated and broken down, and the way that a lot of founders and pitches and business ideas were seen. So yeah, I was on the giving end of a lot of conversations like the one that you were just referring to, where I get
Yeah,
a couple of really smart founders on the line with a brilliant business idea that would work, and had an
yeah,
audience and customers. But every VC is trained to go back to first principles of, is this a potential billion dollar business over the course of the next decade? Am I losing you? Are we good?
yeah. Sorry, we're doing a little audio buffering, some buffering. We're saying we're
Okay,
speaking
okay,
truth about tech giants, and so consequently,
okay, okay,
they're going to
okay.
buffer
I'll
us
keep
a little
going,
bit.
because I think it caught me buffering as well. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
so if the answer is no, then you almost, depending on what firm you work at, or depending on the strategy, you almost automatically have to place that startup in a bucket of maybe,
yeah.
if not no, right? And you know the data that a lot of VCs have to work off of, in terms of being able to determine whether a business in a category has the possibility of 10xing or becoming a $300+ million business, is the past couple of decades, maybe at the most, of performance, right?
Right.
So, because, like, let's take CPG for example. Like, a good exit for an investor for CPG historically over the past couple of decades is probably like 2.5, 3. If anything
Right.
more than that, you're probably, you're a legend, and you become very rich off of that. So models that require, because of pressures from LP, or just because of the way that the firm is constructed and the fund is constructed, they need to average a return of 5x or higher, or they're promising like exorbitant returns. They'll probably skip most CPG investments, not because the businesses are bad. They might fall in love with the
Right.
founder and the product. It just, financially, it doesn't work because of the comps
Right.
that exist. But where I'm going at is, there's this category of business that is referred to in a pejorative way in venture, called a lifestyle business.
Mm.
And to anyone outside of venture, you might think of a lifestyle business as a positive, like that's kind of a positive connotation. I love lifestyle businesses. They take most of my my money. But
Well, they're the businesses that people want to participate with.
right, like, I guess, like, optional businesses. Like, they don't provide the infrastructure of the way the world works, but they are the commercial layer, right? But
Right.
to
Sure.
me, that's where culture lives.
Hmm.
And so whenever I see on Twitter or other places, founders get really frustrated with, the fundraising process. I mean, half of it is because when you're in seat at a venture firm, you're not allowed to kill a founder. You should never kill a founder's dreams at raising. You might get a firm that takes a flyer, or will give you that check based on just relationships, to build that relationship over time. But
Yeah.
you know, a lot of businesses that are pitched to venture are not venture backable, because they don't hit
Right.
that threshold of potentially 10xing. And even if they do, so many VCs will categorically write you off in the first 5 minutes of the conversation when they realize that you fall into a category that has historically not provided returns for this investment class. But
Sure.
it's not said point blank, and it's not said explicitly, and it's often not provided in
Yeah.
the feedback to founders. And I think it does a
Yeah.
disservice
Oh, huge,
altogether.
huge disservice. The moment of clarity for us was we had lunch with Ben Lehrer, who I'm sure you know,
Hmm.
and former media guy and longtime friend, and now deploying money through VC, and he broke down the direct math. Nobody that
Yeah,
we had talked to at that point was willing to say that, and he said it to me because he's a friend, and I
yeah,
really appreciate that. And it totally changed the trajectory of what we were trying to do, and kind of provided a little bit of an endpoint. But it was like that was what you have to give it to people in that way. I think I understand not wanting to kill people's dreams, but Jesus, like.
yeah.
Don't sentence them to waste their time forever either. That's stupid.
Absolutely, and there are other sources of capital. I mean, there are family
Yeah.
offices. There's obviously there's friends and family. There are different networks that you can work. There are angel investors that will, they'll write checks based on their passion.
Right.
That's reflected in any startup idea. But I think a lot of founders, especially on the tech side, they want that that splashy headline and article in TechCrunch, right? So that's part of the motivating
Right.
factor to land a venture round. But I also feel like if there is a lifestyle idea that has an audience that will produce cash flow if not profits, it might be better to just get it off the ground and bootstrap it for a while.
Hmm.
It'll give you a better chance of landing a venture round if you eventually still want to go that way. But there's no there's no problem in making $1 million a year in your pocket and being happy and running a business that you love without an investor calling you every month and asking you why you're not growing faster,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah, for
And
sure. Well, so okay, so this is interesting, right? And it gets back to something you said a minute ago about Substack and the idea of migrating your store of value, let's call it, to a platform where you have a little bit more agency over it and you have a little bit more, visibility into what that value actually holds. There was an announcement this week. I don't know if you follow it, but a newsletter called Retail Diary that's written by a woman named Sarah Shapiro in San Francisco was acquired by Puck and is being brought under the umbrella of Line Sheet, the Lauren Sherman's fashion newsletter. They did a podcast to announce this partnership, and one of the things that Lauren said in the pod was, when Sarah and I talked about this, I said to her, you don't have to do this. You could continue building in your own fashion over here. I then start thinking about like so who else fits into the Line Sheet universe? Who else would Puck, who
mm,
has some venture backing and is reasonably well capitalized and seems to be successful, or at least growing at a good rate? Who else would they acquire? And would those people say yes? Does Rachel Tastian sell them opulent tips? Does Emily Sundberg sell them Feed Me? What are the incentives to stay separate? And I guess part of it, I can see it as somebody who has a Substack with or has a newsletter. So we were chided recently not to call Substacks not to call newsletters Substacks because they're not about really the platform. Anyway, um, as somebody who can see it from the inside, I sort of see both the angles. I wonder, is that part of your motivation in terms of setting up the newsletter also, is to get in again at the coalface and kind of understand where the heat is coming from?
not necessarily. I mean, I'm not operating off of any particular like business model or aspirations. I will say though that the transfer of that, if you want to call it first party data, or just knowing
Yeah.
who my followers are from Twitter to Substack, is leading further to the development of a community that I've been very slow at starting, but I already have like a couple of hundred people signed up on the waiting list that will live on Slack, but will be as IRL as it is URL. And it's not because I want to, make like sponsorship or advertising revenue off of that. That's kind of the fuel for my
Got it.
career in a way. I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
want
for
to
sure. Well,
I want to be privy to conversations. I want to reinforce the network that I've built. I want to get to know
mhm.
who these people are in a way where I could kind of control the flow of information in a way, to help to
Yep.
facilitate great conversations and not be exposed to so much of the unwieldy stuff that's on Twitter right now. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of the direction that
Well, no,
I'm thinking about.
no, it does. It 100% does. I mean, and it's interesting because like that, hearing you talk about that reminds me of Sunday Dinner and what Lindsay Slavey
Hmm.
has built with that community, which is very, very valuable, like basically impossible to get into, and um, you know, I think pays a lot of dividends for Lindsay as a business development tool and a front door, but also is just like a great magnanimous act. It also reminds me a little bit of what Paul Munford was doing at Lean Lux, which
Hmm.
seems to have headed off in some other direction. Um, but I think the value of it is exactly right. And in fact, if I was a little bit more intentional about what Breakfast Club could be, I would be thinking about like, how do you make more of a business out of it? As it happens, I just like going for eggs with people I like. So,
I mean, if you decide to commercialize it, I have a few ideas for you, because every time I go to
yeah.
Breakfast Club, I'm like, if I was one of these, B2B nerds, like this would be the perfect strategic partnership or acquisition target. But I think the fact that it is organic and that there isn't really an agenda for any given meeting is what makes it what it is. So, but
Yeah,
I think there's a
100%.
fine balance of you know uh, creating commercial opportunity to the benefit of everyone in the community. Um, and I feel like that's the future. And I think it goes back
Yeah.
to, it's the same vibration as independent publishing,
Hmm.
with Substacks, or people wanting to speak directly to their audience through newsletters. It feels like small ball in a way. It feels like everything is getting back to its roots. Even what you
Hmm.
explained right now with the Puck acquisition of different newsletters, like it feels like the late 2000s, early 2010s again, when old school ad networks operated in such a way,
Yep.
before it was kind of ruined by the need for everyone to be data driven and pivot to video and all that. So it still feels pure, and it hasn't been commoditized yet, and it comes from a place of great curation and taste,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
in a lot of ways,
100%.
it's an affront and a reaction to just the slop on the rest of the internet.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting. So I went to the Worth Media Techonomy Day a couple of weeks ago.
Hmm.
And one of the sort of final speakers of the day said something that was interesting. He had picked out a he had picked out the term the truth economy from
Mm.
something that had been said previously in the day, which I didn't hear, so I don't have a ton of context on it. But the truth economy immediately brought to mind what Daisy Eliotto at Dirt says about the taste economy, which is kind of, I think, what you're getting at to some degree. And it made me think, okay, hold on. If truth is one vector of a new economy and taste is another vector of a new economy. So in other words, it is literally like um, the ability to discern the ineffable, right, which is taste, the ability to authenticate the valid, which is truth, and then I tend to think in threes. So I'm like, what's the third T?
Mm.
Like, what's the other one that creates the triangle of solidity there? And so I literally asked the question of the keynote speaker. He said tribe, which to me is, on the one hand, is a smart observation, but on the other hand, it's a little too close to taste to be the third leg on the stool. Um, Somebody else said tradition, which I thought was
Mm.
interesting because it's a means to to I don't know what, authenticate in a different way. It's not saying simply that the thing is definitely there, but
It's a
it's that it
codification in a way,
yeah,
like a
yeah,
rich,
exactly.
like
But
from a ritual perspective.
yeah, sort of. But I'm still not satisfied, and I feel like there's another T out there someplace, and I wonder if eh, word association, anything comes to mind.
But by the way, speaking of Tribe, have you read this book by Sebastian Junger by the name of Tribe? It's
No,
excellent.
no,
It's
no.
I would suggest it.
Okay,
I'm reading it for like the third time because I think it speaks to a lot of what is happening in media and communities and just the current state of things. It's about how
when's the book
essentially,
from?
when is it from?
Yeah,
Or where's
when?
let me see, 2016. So I think it was a bit
Okay,
prescient
so last decade, last decade.
in the
Okay,
last
interesting.
decade. But I just picked it up about a year ago, and I it's a quick read. You can read it in one sitting. It's like a couple of hundred pages, but it speaks to human nature's default being that of needing to belong to a tribe, and how modern society has disintermediated that, or has um, kind of defeated that purpose in a way where we all
Hmm.
have this like longing for it, and we try to find it in different ways. And some people suffer with depression or all sorts of other things because of the lack of community, and other people run headfirst into trying to build it. But it's a lot of historical, sociological and socioeconomic, and psychological stuff that Sebastian Junger goes through in that book. So I
But you could still
thoroughly
get through
recommend
it
it.
in one sitting.
Yeah. It's like 150, less than 200 pages. It's like a long. It's like a long article, I would consider.
Okay. Okay. It's funny you should mention this because yesterday at Breakfast Club in New York, in Brooklyn, we were talking about, or somebody brought up the book Bowling Alone, which is by Robert Putnam. And
Mm-hmm.
he just put a new book out called The Upswing, um, which is subtitled How America Came Together a Century Ago and How We Can Do It Again. But I think it makes a similar sort of argument to what you're saying, which is that apparently it is we is hard coded into our DNA to participate in tribal units, let's call them, and that because they have been disintermediated by distance, by digital, by you know whatever the third D is, since I'm thinking in
Thinking in
alliterative
threes.
threes. Yeah, the that we have to assess that and we have to get back to it, and so naturally the long-term trend will be back towards bringing people together in these units. So yeah, it's fascinating. I think for whatever reason I think of Sebastian Junger as like a war correspondent. Is he not?
He is, but he also took the time to write this book. I think
Interesting. Okay.
I think from
Well, I mean, war will give you I
incorporating
mean
a lot of
the
observations from war.
yeah, 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 for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
that'll give you some perspective on it for sure.
even though he doesn't speak about like war explicitly, he talks about like how different societies have navigated conflict and tribal unity and things like that. But I think works like this, because Bowling Alone is not a new work as well. I know it's contemporary, but it's not from just a couple of years ago. I think
Yeah.
we're reaching this critical point in at least American society where we need to actively push back on, and this might be a post-pandemic thing, but I think people are starving for community, and with
Yeah. Hmm.
hybrid and remote work and all the stats. I don't know how true or accurate they are about young people not dating or having sex or ever wanting to get married or mate or whatever, because of how difficult it is to meet other people. And you can assign blame for that to all sorts of things. I already mentioned the
Right.
pandemic, but there's also dating apps and other things like that. It's really interesting to see where the innovation is happening. I would consider Breakfast Club an innovation. I would consider what I'm I would consider what I'm trying to do with Third City from a community perspective. Whenever I get it off the ground, that's, I think, if not innovative by technological standards,
Sure.
it is. People are making efforts to codify and create meaning out of human connection, which is more important than ever. And it's particularly interesting. Again, putting my VC hat on, there are some really interesting apps that have popped up over just the past 18 months that are
Okay.
skyrocketing, that are tackling all the things I just talked about head on. There's
Give me an example.
a startup called Time Left.
Okay.
I don't know too much about the company, but what they do is they're a subscription service. So they're a SaaS company, so you pay like $20 a month. But what you can do, you can opt in to have dinner with a group of strangers every Wednesday night, right?
Okay.
Mixed gender. They have an algorithm that matches based on interest, based on how it might be how old you are. I don't remember, or it could be like your profession or what your interest, whatever. Geography obviously matters. Like they're smart enough to know that like someone East Side LA won't want to go to dinner all the way in Santa Monica, for example. But it seems really interesting. I've gone to one of them.
Okay.
And it was cool. It was kind of like, in a weird way, it felt like I was on a group like blind date. Even though that wasn't the intent, I think people are so disenchanted and jaded from dating apps that like something that feels adjacent to that but is not that feels safer.
Yeah.
And for that
Yeah.
reason,
Yeah.
people will willingly would want to pay for it. There's another app called I think it's called Breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking
Yeah.
of
I know the
Breakfast
one.
Club,
I think it is called. I
the
think it is called
Breakfast.
breakfast. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Oh, the
Breakfast,
breakfast.
where they have an algorithm that matches you based on your interest with someone in the same city, and you decide whether you want to grab breakfast with them or not. And again, like it is professional community. It's like LinkedIn adjacent, but it's also Tinder adjacent in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that it lives in the middle is what makes those startups, and I think there are half a dozen others that are like that have gained some traction. I think that's what makes them special, because they address community without explicitly saying you're looking for romance, or you're looking to get laid, or you're looking for your next project, or
Right. Business leads or
just want a
whatever it is.
power
Yeah.
lunch, right? So I think that's an interesting development, and it feels new, and some investors have recognized that and are pouring money into that thesis.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's funny actually. I went to an event last night at Luna Luna, the like art carnival
Mm-hmm.
experience thing that
Yeah.
started in Austria in the 80s and was in LA and is now in New York at the Shed. And it was under the auspices of C2, the creative conference from Montreal that I visited in May. And then also Adweek, I think, was one of the sponsors. And then our buddies, Eric Lavoie and Gerhard Stokel and Tara Nolan as their little not a consultancy practice. The reason I bring it up is because it was an outing where people were brought together because they are potentially valuable to one another from a business perspective. Like there were investment people from media holding companies, and there were people from media startups, and there were people from the TikTok and so on. But what was nice about it was that there was never a moment where it was just like, oh, we're putting you together to generate some sort of business outcome. It was like, you guys are all our friends. Let's kind of you can find your way through it. The thing, and which is sort of the driving impulse behind Breakfast Club. The thing that makes me feel a little funny about the idea of the breakfast or of time left, and maybe more so the breakfast than of time left, is that like there was a person there last night. I'm not going to get into doxing anybody, but who was like really on their value proposition sales grind. Let me explain to you what I do. Tell me what you do. Let's, sniff each other's butts in the
Yeah.
fastest possible way. And then I
Yeah.
can decide whether this is an interaction worth having. I hate that shit. I have always hated that shit. And what I worry about a little bit on the time left thing is it's like if you show up or the breakfast thing, you show up to somebody and they're just like, it's the person on the unstoppable grind. There is nothing in the context that signals to them, slow down, buddy.
Yeah.
This isn't the way you have to do this. Like, sure, there's a moment for that, but you don't have to do it that way. So I wonder, yeah, to what
Oh,
extent literally group settings are important in setting that context.
that's the risk, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a digital platform. So how good is the algorithm in curating people who are on the same wavelength? I mean, it's been
Yeah.
pretty much impossible on every other platform. And how, if it is magical and if it does work, how can that be maintained as the
Hmm.
platform scales? Because as we
Yeah,
know,
for sure.
scale is the enemy of taste, or craft in a lot of ways. So,
Yeah,
will those connections be diluted over time? Will all of these platforms start to resemble each other over time because everyone who is seeking something of a solution like them will sign up for all of them, right? And
yeah,
then it becomes
yeah, yeah, for
another,
sure.
a match group equivalent starts to scoop them all up. So history might be repeating itself, but like so many things, the beginnings of companies, of platforms that bring people together are always special, and it's always a struggle to
Yeah,
maintain that over time. But from my rational optimist perspective, I want to capture that value, or
yeah,
I want to experience the magic while it's still there before the inevitable decline. And I think that's something that in the business world we just all have to accept. Like,
yeah.
some businesses will
Mm,
be flash in the pan, others will last 10 years, some special few will last 100 years, but nothing will ever match the growth phase, because that's where the energy and the advocates and the acolytes and all those things, that's where they are. Like, you can't be successful at a community built business without people actively going out of their way to talk about you without needing to be compensated, because they get so much value out of the electricity in the air,
yeah,
right? And then,
yeah.
and then you get some funding, and people want you to 10x it, and then all of a sudden you need to put a dozen logos on every flyer for it, and then it's the beginning of the end, but you were happy to be around while it was still pure.
Yeah, 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 for sure. That's it. That's it. It's like the question that Eddie Wong asked everybody in the
Mm-hmm.
Vice Vice documentary was, if you could do it, if you could do it all again, would you? And every single person said yes. So
Yeah, yeah.
sort of funny in that regard. All right, well, Michael, this is a good place for us to wrap on that optimistic note, but also on the with the acknowledgement that the future is uncertain and that we're all finding our way through it as best we can. The uh, uh, I am very keen to see the fifth edition of Third City and where you take it. I think your analysis and just generally your perspective through the newsletters has been pretty awesome. And like I said, I'm not a Twitter guy, so it's nice surface area for me to exist outside of the timeline, so to speak.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on as a guest. Appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
Of course.
And
Thank you.
I think I've known you for 20 years now, which is basically half of my life. So this is insane. And I love that
I,
every so often we get together like this, whether on Clubhouse or now on these talks or whatever else is in the
yeah,
future.
or
Happy to
in
do it.
person, at Breakfast Club, in person at Breakfast
Yeah.
Club. Speaking of which, if you're in LA and convenient to the East Side, um, Michael and gang get together right now once a month. I'm going to nudge them to do it more often, but that's we'll do that off mic. But in any case, you can look out for it, and it's a very welcoming and cool environment. And beyond that, just like very, very smart people. So worth seeking out.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
All right, dude. Yep. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon.